The neon lights of the Stardust Cantina flickered against the metallic walls of Station Epsilon 7, casting dancing shadows across the diverse crowd of alien patrons. Marcus Chen wiped down a glass with practiced precision, his weathered hands moving in the same steady rhythm they had for the past 3 years. To everyone who frequented the bar, he was just another human trying to make an honest living in the Outer Rim territories. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of conversations in dozens of languages. Corellian traders argued over shipping routes while Zentorian miners nursed their drinks after a long shift in the asteroid fields. Marcus moved between them all like a ghost, refilling drinks, cleaning tables, and maintaining the careful balance that kept his establishment peaceful. A group of Thrakari soldiers occupied the corner booth, their purple-scaled faces twisted in what passed for amusement among their species. Their black uniforms bore the insignia of the Galactic Enforcement Division, and their weapons hung openly at their sides. Marcus had learned long ago that showing fear to predators only made them hungry. "Another round for Table 7, called out Zara, his Altarian waitress. Her blue skin shimmered under the lights as she approached the bar. "The Thrakari are getting louder. Should I be worried?" Marcus glanced at the soldiers. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Commander Vex, was telling a story about a recent raid on a human colony. The others laughed at the graphic details, their razor-sharp teeth gleaming. Marcus had heard similar stories before. They never got easier to listen to. "Just keep serving them," Marcus said quietly. "They'll move on eventually." What Zara didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus recognized Commander Vex. Not personally, but by reputation. The Thrakari had led the assault on New Geneva 2 years ago. 3,000 civilians had died in what the Galactic Council called a police action. Marcus remembered watching the news feeds from his small apartment, feeling something cold and familiar stirring in his chest. The door chimed as new customers entered. A family of human refugees by the look of them. The woman carried a sleeping child while the man scanned the room nervously. Their clothes were worn and dirty, suggesting they'd been traveling for weeks. Marcus had seen thousands like them over the years, families fleeing the expanding conflicts in human space. The father approached the bar hesitantly. "Excuse me, do you serve humans here?" "Everyone's welcome," Marcus replied, sliding 3 glasses of water across the bar. "On the house." The man's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. We've been traveling for days. The transport ship only had emergency rations." Marcus nodded toward an empty table. "Take a seat. I'll bring you some food." As the family settled in, Marcus noticed Commander Vex watching them with interest. The Thrakari's yellow eyes held a predatory gleam that Marcus knew all too well. He continued wiping glasses, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. To most observers, he still looked like a simple bartender, but years of training had taught him to read a room like a tactical situation. "Hey, human," Commander Vex called out, his voice carrying across the cantina. "Those refugees look familiar. Weren't you at New Geneva?" The father's face went pale. The woman instinctively pulled her child closer. Marcus set down his glass and walked over to their table. "Is there a problem here?" he asked calmly. Commander Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Just asking our new friends about their travels. Sometimes criminals try to hide among the refugees." "They're customers," Marcus said. "They're under my protection." The Thrakari soldiers found this hilarious. Commander Vex stood up slowly, all 7 feet of his imposing frame casting a shadow over the bar. His hand rested casually on his plasma rifle. "Your protection?" Vex sneered. "What are you going to do, throw a drink at us?" Marcus kept his expression neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. For just a moment the mask slipped, and those who knew what to look for might have seen something dangerous underneath. But the Thrakari only saw what they expected to see, a frightened human trying to act brave. "I'm asking politely," Marcus said. "Let them eat in peace." Vex took a step closer. "And I'm telling you to mind your own business, bartender. Unless you want to end up like the other humans who got in our way." The cantina had gone quiet. Even the regular patrons who had never seen Marcus lose his temper could sense the tension building. Zara backed away from the tables, her blue skin turning pale. Marcus looked at the human family. The child had woken up and was staring at the Thrakari with wide, frightened eyes. It was a look Marcus had seen before in places he tried not to remember. "The kind of fear that children should never have to experience, please," the human father whispered. "We don't want any trouble." Commander Vex heard the plea and smiled wider. Too late for that. You see, we have reports of terrorist activity in this sector. We need to search these refugees for contraband. Marcus knew what that meant. Thrakari searches of human civilians rarely ended well. The family would disappear into a detention facility if they were lucky. If they weren't, they'd become another statistic in the ongoing conflict. The family stays, Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge that made several patrons step back. For the first time, Commander Vex really looked at the bartender. Something about the human stance, the way he held himself, seemed different. But Vex was confident in his superiority. Humans were weak, everyone knew that. They'd been losing their little rebellion for decades. Or what? Vex challenged, drawing his sidearm. You'll stop me? Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides. To anyone watching, he looked completely outmatched. A simple bartender facing down armed soldiers. It should have been over before it started. But Marcus Chen hadn't always been a bartender. Once, in what felt like another lifetime, he'd had a different name and a very different job. Once, entire star systems had known that name and what it meant. The Thrakari Enforcement Division still had his old photograph on their most wanted lists. Though they'd long ago assumed he was dead, they called him the Ghost of Kepler Station. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Commander Vex kept his weapon trained on Marcus, waiting for the human to back down like they always did. Around the cantina, alien patrons watched with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some began quietly moving toward the exits. Marcus remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the Thrakari commander. Years of meditation and discipline had taught him patience. But underneath the calm surface, old instincts were awakening. His breathing stayed steady, but his awareness expanded to take in every detail of the room. 3 soldiers, standard plasma rifles, overconfident. The family behind him, vulnerable. 17 civilians who could get caught in crossfire. Smart choice, Vex said when Marcus didn't immediately respond. Now step aside. Instead of moving, Marcus spoke in a voice so quiet that Vex had to lean forward to hear him. Do you know what happened at Kepler Station? The question caught the Thrakari off guard. Vex's yellow eyes narrowed. Kepler Station was old history, a human research facility that had been destroyed early in the war. The official report said it was a terrorist bombing, but there were rumors among the military ranks. Stories that didn't make it into the public records. Some humans blew themselves up rather than surrender, Vex replied. Typical cowardice. Marcus smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Not exactly. Kepler Station was a Thrakari detention center. 2,000 human prisoners, including women and children. Your people were using them for experiments. Several aliens in the cantina shifted uncomfortably. The war between humans and the Galactic Enforcement Division was officially about territorial disputes, but everyone knew the real story. Humanity had been designated a primitive species and marked for subjugation or elimination. One night, Marcus continued, a single human infiltrated the station. Security feeds showed him moving through the corridors like a shadow. He disabled the guards one by one without raising an alarm. Then he freed the prisoners and helped them escape. Commander Vex's grip tightened on his weapon. The story was classified, but he'd heard whispers of it in military briefings. The incident had been an embarrassment to the Enforcement Division. An entire garrison defeated by one human. The humans got away, Marcus said. But the station's computer core contained detailed records of the experiments. Medical data, genetic profiles, torture methods, all of it ended up broadcast across the galaxy before the human destroyer the facility. Terrorist propaganda, Vex snarled. Maybe. But it's funny how your people stopped taking human prisoners after that. Started shooting on sight instead, almost like you were afraid the same thing might happen again. The Thrakari soldiers exchanged glances. Their commander's scarred face had gone pale beneath his purple scales. Marcus noticed the slight tremor in Vex's hands and filed the information away. Why are you telling me this? Vex demanded. Marcus finally moved, but only to pour himself a glass of water. The casual gesture made several soldiers flinch. Just curious if you knew the real story. See, the thing about the ghost of Kepler Station is that he never died. The Enforcement Division assumed he went down with the facility, but there was never a body found. The human father behind Marcus made a small, choking sound as recognition dawned. His wife's eyes went wide with shock and sudden hope. Even Zara, standing frozen by the bar, began to understand why her boss always seemed so calm in dangerous situations. Commander Vex was no fool. He'd risen through the ranks by being paranoid and thorough. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The bartender's unusual composure, his protective stance, the way he moved with unconscious precision. But it seemed impossible. The ghost was a legend. A boogeyman used to frighten new recruits. "You're just a bartender," Vex said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "For 3 years now," Marcus agreed. "It's surprisingly peaceful work. You meet interesting people, hear their stories, help them forget their troubles for a while. Much better than my old job." One of the younger Thrakari soldiers whispered something to his companion. Marcus caught the words impossible and dead. They were right to be nervous. The ghost of Kepler Station wasn't just one incident. Over the course of 2 years, he'd been responsible for a dozen similar operations. Prisoner rescues, data theft, assassinations of war criminals. Always alone, always invisible until it was too late. But sometimes, Marcus continued, setting down his glass with deliberate care, old habits resurface, especially when someone threatens innocent people. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Several alien patrons had now reached the exits, but many remained, either too curious or too frightened to move. The Corellian traders had their hands near their own weapons, though they were clearly hoping to avoid getting involved. Commander Vex's tactical training warred with his disbelief. Every instinct told him to retreat, to call for backup, to treat this as a potential threat. But accepting that the legendary human operative was standing in front of him meant admitting that everything his people believed about human weakness might be wrong. "Even if you are who you claim to be," Vex said, "you're outnumbered. 3 against 1. Marcus glanced around the cantina, noting positions and angles. "Actually, it's worse than that. You forgot about Zara." The Altarian waitress looked surprised. "Marcus, I don't know how to fight." "You don't need to. Just hit the emergency lockdown when I give the signal. We don't want our friends here calling for reinforcements." Now Vex was certain he was dealing with the real thing. The casual confidence, the tactical awareness, the complete lack of fear. It all matched the classified profiles. But he'd come too far to back down now. His reputation with his troops was on the line. "Last chance, human. Move aside or we'll go through you." Marcus looked at the frightened family one more time. The child was crying softly, clinging to her mother's shirt. It reminded him of another child in another place a long time ago. The reason he'd become the ghost in the first place. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Marcus said, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he moved away from the bar. The change was subtle but unmistakable. The tired bartender vanished, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Marcus rolled his shoulders, loosening muscles that hadn't seen real action in years. His stance shifted to a combat crouch so natural it seemed like breathing. Commander Vex finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't some broken refugee or cowering civilian. This was a predator, and they'd just wandered into his territory. The first shot came from the youngest Thrakari soldier, his nerves finally snapping under the pressure. The plasma bolt seared through the air where Marcus had been standing a split second before. The human had already moved, diving behind the bar as the blast scorched the wall behind him. "Lockdown!" Marcus shouted. Zara's blue hand slammed down on the emergency controls. Heavy blast doors began sliding shut over the cantina's exits, sealing everyone inside. The lighting shifted to emergency amber, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Commander Vex cursed in his native language. The lockdown meant no communications could get out, but it also meant no escape for any of them. He'd intended this to be a simple intimidation of refugees, not a firefight with a legendary human operative. Marcus popped up from behind the bar for a split second, just long enough to hurl a bottle with inhuman precision. It struck the youngest soldier in the head, shattering against his helmet and sending him sprawling. The Thrakari's rifle clattered across the floor, sliding toward the Corellian traders who wisely kicked it away. "2 left," Marcus called out conversationally, as if he were commenting on the weather. The remaining soldiers spread out trying to flank his position. But Marcus knew the cantina's layout better than anyone. 3 years of working here had shown him every angle, every piece of cover, every potential weapon. The bar was his fortress, and he'd defended worse positions against larger forces. A plasma bolt punched through the bar's metal surface, missing Marcus by inches. He rolled to the left, grabbing a bottle of Centauri whiskey as he moved. The alcohol splashed across the floor as he smashed it, creating a slick that would make footing treacherous for anyone trying to rush his position. "You're only making this worse for yourself," Commander Vex shouted. "Surrender now and I'll make it quick." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You know what the funny thing is, Commander? I actually was trying to retire. 3 years of mixing drinks, listening to sob stories, cleaning up after drunk miners. I thought maybe I could find some peace." Another plasma shot, this one from the second soldier who was trying to circle around through the dining area. Marcus had already anticipated the move. A heavy glass mug flew through the air, striking the Thrakari in the throat and dropping him to his knees. Gasping, "But you people never learn," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the cantina despite the chaos. "You see humans as weak because we don't have natural weapons like your claws or thick hides like the Vorlax. You think technology is the only thing that matters in a fight." Commander Vex was growing desperate. His tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. One soldier unconscious, one choking and unable to fight effectively, and his target was somehow controlling the entire engagement from behind a bar. This wasn't how battles with humans were supposed to go. Marcus rose smoothly from cover, a gleaming metal object in his hand. Vex recognized it as one of the cantina's serving trays, but in the human's grip it looked like a weapon, which Vex realized it had just become. The tray flew through the air in a perfect arc, spinning like a blade. Vex threw himself sideways, but the metal disc caught his rifle and tore it from his grip. The weapon clattered across the floor, now several meters away. "What you don't understand," Marcus said, walking out from behind the bar, "is that humans are dangerous precisely because we're physically weak. It made us creative, inventive, desperate enough to turn anything into a weapon." The human refugees watched in amazement as their protector moved through the cantina like death itself. Every step was calculated, every gesture purposeful. This wasn't the tired bartender they'd met minutes ago. This was something out of their darkest nightmares and brightest dreams combined. The choking soldier had recovered enough to reach for a backup weapon. Marcus noticed the movement without even turning his head. A salt shaker flew through the air with bullet-like precision, striking the Thrakari's wrist and making him drop the pistol. Humans learn to hunt creatures 10 times our size with nothing but pointed sticks. Marcus continued his lecture, advancing slowly toward Commander Vex. "We crossed oceans in wooden boxes and conquered deserts that could kill us in hours. We figured out how to split atoms and travel between stars." Vex scrambled backward, trying to reach his fallen rifle, but Marcus kicked over a table, sending chairs sliding across the floor to block the Thrakari's path. The commander's yellow eyes darted around the cantina, looking for any advantage, any escape route. The blast doors remained sealed, and when your people decided we were too primitive to deserve freedom, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "we learned how to be ghosts." The youngest soldier had regained consciousness and was trying to crawl toward the exit. Marcus noticed but didn't stop him. The blast doors would hold, and an injured enemy was often more valuable than a dead one. Let him spread stories about what happened here. Commander Vex finally reached his rifle and spun around, finger already on the trigger. But Marcus wasn't where he'd expected. The human had somehow circled around during his approach, using the overturned furniture and scattered debris as cover. Now he stood directly behind the Thrakari commander. "Looking for someone?" Marcus asked. Vex spun around, bringing his weapon to bear, but Marcus was already moving. Years of combat experience guided his actions as he grabbed the rifle's barrel and twisted. The plasma weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Marcus used Vex's own momentum to throw the larger alien across the room. The commander hit the wall hard, his armor clattering against the metal surface. He slumped to the floor, dazed but conscious. Around the cantina, the other patrons stared in stunned silence. They just watched a single human systematically dismantle 3 armed soldiers without breaking a sweat. Marcus checked on the choking soldier, whose breathing had returned to normal. The alien looked up at him with fear and something that might have been respect. Marcus knelt down and spoke quietly. "Your commander made a mistake tonight. He threatened people under my protection. Now you're going to help me correct that mistake." The soldier nodded frantically. Whatever reputation the ghost of Kepler Station had among Thrakari forces, it was clearly enough to guarantee cooperation. Marcus stood and walked back toward Commander Vex, who was trying to pull himself upright. The human's expression was calm, almost gentle, but there was something in his eyes that made several aliens in the cantina look away. "Now then, Commander," Marcus said pleasantly. "I believe we need to have a conversation about your behavior in my establishment." Commander Vex struggled to his feet, purple blood trickling from a cut above his eye. His armor was dented, his pride shattered, and his tactical situation hopeless. Around the cantina, his soldiers remained down, nursing their injuries and watching their legendary opponent with fearful respect. Marcus gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit." The simple command carried such authority that Vex found himself obeying before his conscious mind caught up. He slumped into the seat, trying to process what had just happened. 3 experienced soldiers, defeated by a human bartender using improvised weapons. It defied everything he'd been taught about human capabilities. "Zara," Marcus called to his waitress, "could you check on our guests? Make sure everyone's all right." The Altarian woman moved carefully through the cantina, her blue skin still pale with shock. The other patrons were unharmed but visibly shaken. The human family remained huddled at their table, the parents staring at Marcus with expressions of awe and gratitude. Marcus pulled up another chair and sat across from Commander Vex. Up close, the Thrakari could see details he'd missed before. Scars on the human's hands that spoke of old wounds, a slight tension around his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. The careful way he positioned himself to watch all the exits simultaneously. "You want to know how I really ended up here?" Marcus asked conversationally. Vex said nothing, but his yellow eyes remained fixed on the human's face. "After Kepler Station, I kept fighting for 2 more years," Marcus continued. "Hit supply convoys, freed prisoner ships, assassinated war criminals. The Enforcement Division put a massive bounty on my head, dead or alive, though they preferred dead." Marcus stood and walked behind the bar, retrieving a bottle of Altarian wine that had somehow survived the firefight. He poured 2 glasses, offering one to Vex. The commander stared at it suspiciously. "It's not poisoned," Marcus said. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead." After a moment's hesitation, Vex accepted the glass. The wine was good, better than anything he could afford on a soldier's pay. "Why did you stop?" "Burnout. Post-traumatic stress. Call it whatever you want." Marcus took a sip of his wine. "I'd been fighting for 5 years straight. Living on stolen ships, eating military rations, never staying in one place for more than a few days. Always looking over my shoulder. Always ready to kill or be killed." The human family had approached the bar quietly, the father still carrying his sleeping daughter. Marcus noticed them but continued his story. "The breaking point came on Europa Station. I'd gone there to extract a group of human scientists who were being held for interrogation. Everything went wrong. Security was heavier than expected. The extraction point was compromised, and I had to fight my way out through 3 levels of armed guards." Marcus's voice grew distant, as if he was seeing the events play out again behind his eyes. "I got the scientists out, all 12 of them. But during the firefight, a stray plasma bolt hit a residential section. A daycare center." Commander Vex felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard about Europa Station. The official reports blamed human terrorists for the civilian casualties, but now he was hearing the other side of the story. 17 children died, Marcus said quietly. Alien children? Corellian, Altarian, even a few young Thrakari. They had nothing to do with the war, nothing to do with human oppression. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cantina had gone completely silent. Even the injured soldiers were listening now, their training temporarily forgotten in the face of such brutal honesty. That night, I realized I'd become exactly what your people said humans were. A monster. A killer who justified any action as long as it served the cause. Marcus looked directly at Vex. I decided I was done being the ghost. The human father stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, we wanted to thank you for protecting us. Marcus nodded acknowledgement but didn't smile. Just doing what anyone should do. No, the man said firmly. Not anyone could have done what you just did. You saved our lives. What's your name? Marcus asked. David Chen. This is my wife Sarah and our daughter Emma. The man paused. Chen, are we related, possibly? It's a common name. Marcus turned back to Commander Vex. David here is a civilian engineer. His wife is a teacher. Their daughter is 5 years old. They're refugees because your people burned their colony looking for resistance fighters. Vex shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was a legitimate military operation. Against a farming colony? Marcus raised an eyebrow. What strategic value did New Harvest have, besides being an easy target to make quotas look good? The commander had no answer for that. New Harvest had indeed been chosen primarily because it was defenseless, the kind of operation that looked good in reports but accomplished nothing meaningful. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his tone becoming businesslike. You and your soldiers are going to leave my cantina. You're going to forget you saw any refugees here tonight, and you're going to pass along a message to your superiors. What message? Marcus leaned forward, and for a moment, the mild-mannered bartender disappeared entirely. In his place sat the ghost of Kepler Station, the human operative who had terrorized Thrakari forces for years. The war is escalating. Human colonies are joining the resistance faster than your people can suppress them. You've created exactly what you feared, a unified human military force with nothing left to lose. And some of us who stepped away from the fight are starting to reconsider our position. Vex felt a chill run down his spine. Intelligence reports had been mentioning increased resistance activity, but High Command dismissed them as exaggerations. Hearing it from the ghost himself carried a different weight entirely. In 3 days, a transport ship will arrive to collect the refugees currently on this station, Marcus continued. Safe passage to the independent colonies in the Centauri sector. Anyone who interferes with that transport will answer to me personally. I can't guarantee you'll find a way, Marcus interrupted, because the alternative is me coming out of retirement. And trust me, Commander, you don't want that. The ghost was already dangerous when he was trying to minimize casualties. Imagine what he could accomplish if he stopped caring about collateral damage. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the cantina, alien patrons began to understand that they'd just witnessed something historic. Not just a fight, but a declaration. The most feared human operative was announcing his potential return to the war. Commander Vex stood slowly, gesturing for his soldiers to follow. They moved carefully, keeping their hands visible and their weapons lowered. Marcus watched them go but remained seated, projecting casual confidence. One more thing, Marcus called as they reached the blast door. Tell your intelligence division that Marcus Chen sends his regards. The door unsealed with a pneumatic hiss, allowing the Thrakari to escape into the station's corridors. As soon as they were gone, the cantina erupted in excited chatter. Aliens who had witnessed the fight began calling friends, spreading the news that the ghost of Kepler Station was alive and still protecting humans. But Marcus Chen, retired special operative turned bartender, simply poured himself another glass of wine and began cleaning up the mess. Some habits, it seemed, died harder than others. Word traveled fast through the corridors of Station Epsilon 7. Within an hour of the cantina incident, every human on the station knew that the legendary ghost of Kepler Station was not only alive, but living among them as a simple bartender. The news spread through whispered conversations in maintenance shafts, coded messages in repair logs, and meaningful glances between workers who had learned to communicate without words under alien occupation. Marcus had reopened the cantina after making basic repairs, though the scorch marks on the walls and overturned furniture told the story of what had transpired. The human refugees had taken rooms in the station's temporary housing, but they regularly visited the bar, drawn by an invisible sense of security that radiated from their protector. 2 days passed in relative calm. Thrakari patrols still moved through the station, but they gave the cantina a wide berth. Commander Vex had apparently taken Marcus's message seriously, because no enforcement officers had bothered the human families seeking passage to safety. That changed on the 3rd morning. Zara burst through the cantina's doors, her blue skin flushed with exertion. Marcus, you need to see this. She activated the wall display, tuning it to the station's public information channel. A Thrakari news anchor was reading from official communications. Her scaled features arranged in an expression of solemn authority, confirmed. Reports of terrorist activity on Station Epsilon 7. High Command has authorized a special task force to investigate security breaches and conduct comprehensive screenings of all human residents. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. The display showed images of military transports docking with the station, their hulls bearing the crimson markings of special operations. These weren't regular enforcement troops like Vex's unit. These were hunters, trained specifically for counterinsurgency operations. Special Task Force Omega has been given extraordinary authority to ensure station security, the anchor continued. All humans will be required to report for processing within 24 hours. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of rebellion. The transmission ended, replaced by a repeating cycle of official notices. Marcus stood motionless, his mind already calculating odds and options. Task Force Omega had a reputation even among Thrakari military units. They were the division responsible for the massacre at Darwin Colony and the orbital bombardment of New Tokyo. If they were here, it meant someone in high command had taken his threat very seriously indeed. "How many humans are on this station?" Marcus asked. "About 300, Zara replied. "Mostly workers and refugees. Some families have been here for years. 300 civilians against a special operations task force." The math was brutally simple. Marcus had spent 3 years trying to avoid this exact scenario, but events had overtaken his careful retirement. The Thrakari had forced his hand by threatening the people he'd sworn to protect. The cantina doors opened again, and David Chen entered with his wife and daughter. The engineer's face was pale with fear. "Marcus, they're going door to door in the residential sections. Scanning identification, demanding travel documents. Families are disappearing." "Where's the transport that was supposed to collect you?" Marcus asked. "Delayed," Sarah Chen said, holding her daughter close. "The captain received new orders to stay clear of this system. Something about increased military activity." Marcus nodded grimly. The Thrakari had moved faster than he'd anticipated, cutting off escape routes before making their play. It was competent tactical planning, the kind he would have expected from a special operations unit. "Zara, do you have access to the station's communication systems?" The Altarian woman nodded. "My clearance covers general broadcasts and maintenance channels." "Why? I need to send a message to every human on this station. Can you patch me through?" "I think so, but if they're monitoring communications, they already know I'm here," Marcus said. "Subtlety isn't an option anymore." Zara activated the communication panel behind the bar. After a few moments of technical manipulation, she nodded. "You're connected to all human quarters and workstations." Marcus took a deep breath, then leaned into the microphone. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a military commander, the certainty of a man who had faced impossible odds and survived. "This is Marcus Chen, speaking to all human residents of Station Epsilon 7. By now you've heard about Task Force Omega and their processing requirements. I want you to understand what that really means. Throughout the station, humans stopped what they were doing to listen. In maintenance bays, workers put down their tools. In living quarters, families gathered around communication panels. Even those who didn't recognize the name felt the power in that calm, steady voice. Processing is a euphemism for interrogation, imprisonment, and execution. Task Force Omega doesn't investigate terrorism. They create it by eliminating potential threats before they can act. Every human on this station is now considered a potential threat. In the Special Operations Command Center that had been hastily established in the station's security office, Colonel Thex listened to the transmission with growing anger. The human was turning what should have been a simple suppression operation into a public relations nightmare. "Can we cut his transmission?" Thex demanded. "Negative, sir. He's using multiple relay points throughout the station. We'd have to shut down all communications." "Then do it." "Sir, that would also disable our own tactical networks." Colonel Thex snarled in frustration. The human was already demonstrating the tactical acumen that had made him legendary. Every move designed to force difficult choices on his opponents. Marcus's voice continued echoing through the station corridors. "I know many of you are afraid. That's natural. What I'm about to tell you isn't. 20 years ago, before the Enforcement Division existed, humans and aliens lived together peacefully on stations like this one. We worked together, learned from each other, built communities that benefited everyone. The historical perspective was deliberate. Many younger aliens on the station had no memory of the time before the war, when species differences were cultural rather than military matters. The war didn't start because humans were violent or primitive. It started because some people decided that cooperation was less profitable than conquest, that diversity was less valuable than conformity, that freedom was less important than control. In the cantina, even the regular alien patrons were listening intently. Marcus was giving them a perspective on the conflict they'd never heard from official sources. In approximately 6 hours, Task Force Omega will begin their operation. They'll come in overwhelming force, expecting easy victims. Instead, They're going to find out why humanity survived ice ages, plague, and world wars long before we ever reached the stars. Colonel Thex felt his blood pressure rising. The human wasn't just rallying the station's residents. He was issuing a direct challenge to a special operations unit. It was either suicidal bravery or calculated insanity. Every human on this station has a choice to make, Marcus concluded. You can report for processing and hope for mercy from people who've never shown it before. Or you can remember that humans didn't climb to the top of the food chain by being prey. The transmission ended. Throughout the station, 300 humans sat in silence, processing what they'd just heard. Many were terrified. Some were angry. A few were beginning to feel something they hadn't experienced in years under alien occupation. They were beginning to feel dangerous. In the cantina, Marcus calmly began preparing for war. He'd tried retirement, tried peace, tried to find a quiet life mixing drinks and listening to stories. But some responsibilities followed a man no matter how far he ran. The ghost of Kepler Station was about to remind the galaxy why ghosts were things to be feared. The assault began exactly 6 hours later, just as Marcus had predicted. Task Force Omega moved with military precision, sealing off sections of the station while specialized teams advanced through the corridors. They expected to find frightened civilians cowering in their quarters, easy targets for processing and deportation. Instead, they found empty corridors and sealed blast doors. In the station's central security office, Colonel Thex stared at his tactical displays in growing frustration. Every section his teams attempted to breach had been evacuated ahead of their arrival. Somehow, 300 untrained civilians were staying one step ahead of his professional soldiers. "Sir, we're getting reports of equipment failures throughout the station," his communications officer reported. "Power fluctuations, ventilation malfunctions, gravity generators cycling on and off." Thex's yellow eyes narrowed. "Sabotage? That's what it looks like. Someone with detailed knowledge of station systems is causing problems faster than our engineers can fix them." What Colonel Thex didn't know was that Marcus had spent 3 years learning. Every inch of Station Epsilon 7. Not just the public areas, but the maintenance tunnels, service ducts, and emergency systems that kept the facility running. More importantly, he'd identified the handful of humans who worked in critical infrastructure positions. In the station's main power distribution center, engineer Rebecca Santos carefully adjusted control settings according to the detailed instructions Marcus had provided. A small power fluctuation here, a minor rerouting there, nothing that would cause permanent damage, but enough to disrupt military communications and slow the advance of Task Force Omega. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered into her communicator, switching to Phase 2. Throughout the station, similar scenes were playing out. Human workers who had been invisible to their alien supervisors for years were suddenly revealing their intimate knowledge of the systems that kept everyone alive. Ventilation engineer Kim Nakamura was redirecting airflow to create pressure differentials that made doors difficult to open. Maintenance Chief Luis Rodriguez was triggering false emergency alerts that sent automated systems into lockdown mode. Marcus had turned the station itself into a weapon. In the cantina, which had become an impromptu command center, Marcus monitored communications traffic and coordinated the resistance. The regular alien patrons had long since fled, but Zara remained at her post, relaying messages between human work teams and helping coordinate their movements. "Task Force Omega is regrouping in Section C," she reported. "They're trying to cut through the blast doors manually." "Tell Rodriguez to vent atmosphere from Section C," Marcus replied calmly. "Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to make their equipment work harder." David Chen, who had refused to evacuate with his family, looked up from the makeshift communication station he was operating. "Marcus, we can't keep this up forever. They'll adapt eventually." "We don't need forever," Marcus said. "Just long enough." "For what?" Before Marcus could answer, alarms began wailing throughout the station. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red, and automated announcements echoed from every speaker. "Attention all personnel. Critical system failure detected. Initiating emergency." Evacuation protocols. Colonel Thex's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. Someone had triggered the station's master emergency system, the fail-safe designed to evacuate all personnel in case of catastrophic damage. Blast doors were sealing to create safe corridors. Evacuation pods were powering up, and most critically, automated distress signals were being broadcast to every ship within 50 light-years. Can we override it? Thex demanded. Negative, sir. Once initiated, the evacuation protocol can only be stopped from the main computer core, and that's in the most heavily shielded section of the station. The colonel realized he'd been outmaneuvered. The human hadn't been trying to win a direct confrontation. He'd been buying time to orchestrate a much larger plan. Within hours, rescue ships would arrive to evacuate station personnel. His special operations force would be forced to either allow the humans to escape or fire on clearly marked civilian vessels in full view of galactic media. Sir, another officer interrupted, we're receiving multiple incoming transmission requests, news agencies, diplomatic vessels, even some Galactic Council representatives. Word has gotten out about our operation here. Thex felt the situation slipping away from him. The ghost of Kepler Station wasn't just tactically brilliant. He understood political warfare as well as the military kind. Every move designed to force impossible choices on his enemies. In the cantina, Marcus was coordinating the final phase of his plan. Human families were making their way through carefully planned routes toward the evacuation bays. Station workers were maintaining just enough critical systems to keep everyone alive, while systematically shutting down everything else. Transport vessels are responding to the distress call, Zara reported. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Good. That gives us time for one more surprise. Marcus activated a different communication channel, one that connected directly to Task Force Omega's command frequency. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout their military network. Colonel Thex, this is Marcus Chen. I believe you wanted to meet me. In the security office, every Thrakari officer turned to stare at their commander. The human had somehow breached their secure communications, demonstrating capabilities that went far beyond anything in his official file. You've been chasing shadows for 6 hours, Marcus continued. Let me save you some time. I'm in the Stardust Cantina, Section G7. I'll be here for the next 30 minutes. After that, I'll be leaving with the evacuees. The transmission ended. Colonel Thex stood motionless, recognizing the trap for what it was. The human was offering himself as bait, probably to buy more time for the civilians to reach safety. But Thex also knew this might be his only chance to capture or kill the most wanted human terrorist in the galaxy. Prepare an assault team, he ordered. Full equipment, maximum firepower. Sir, if this is a trap, of course it's a trap, Thex snapped. But it's also an opportunity. Move out. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood alone in his cantina, calmly polishing glasses while he waited. He'd sent Zara and David Chen to join the evacuation despite their protests. This part of the plan required him to be alone. The blast doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal. Task Force Omega poured through the breach, their weapons trained on every possible hiding spot. But Marcus stood in plain sight behind the bar, apparently unarmed and unconcerned. Colonel Thex entered last, his own weapon drawn. He was taller than Commander Vex had been, more heavily armed and clearly more experienced. But as he looked at the human bartender, he felt the same chill that had affected his subordinate. The famous ghost of Kepler Station, Thex said. You're smaller than I expected. Most people say that, Marcus replied, setting down his glass. Right up until they realize size isn't what makes humans dangerous. You're outnumbered 20-1, closer to 15-1 actually. I can see 3 of your soldiers are hanging back by the entrance, probably watching for reinforcements that aren't coming. The casual tactical assessment unnerved several of the Thrakari soldiers. Their target was analyzing their formation like he was counting inventory. You've caused considerable trouble, human. Not nearly as much as I could have, Marcus said. This was just a demonstration. A reminder that humans are still capable of fighting back when pushed too far. Colonel Thex raised his weapon. Time to end the demonstration. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the siege began, he looked genuinely pleased. Actually, Colonel, the demonstration is just getting started. The cantina's lights went out, plunging everything into absolute darkness. In that moment of confusion, the ghost of Kepler Station finally showed Task Force Omega what 3 years of apparent retirement had been hiding. Emergency lighting flickered on 30 seconds later, revealing a scene that would haunt Thrakari military reports for years to come. 15 soldiers lay unconscious on the cantina floor, their weapons scattered and useless. Colonel Thex knelt in the center of the room, very much alive but completely disarmed, with Marcus standing calmly behind him. "Now then, Colonel," Marcus said pleasantly, "shall we discuss the terms of your surrender?" The rescue ships arrived exactly 4 hours after the evacuation protocol had been triggered, just as Marcus had calculated. 12 vessels from various independent colonies, 3 news ships with their cameras rolling, and 2 Galactic Council observation cruisers drawn by the unprecedented situation. What they found was a space station in controlled chaos, with human civilians boarding evacuation pods under the supervision of disarmed Thrakari soldiers. In the cantina, now serving as an impromptu negotiation chamber, Colonel Thex sat across from Marcus at the same table where the Chen family had taken refuge days earlier. The colonel's armor was dented, his pride wounded, but he was learning that surrender to the ghost of Kepler Station came with unexpected terms. "Your soldiers will be released unharmed," Marcus explained, consulting notes he'd written on a bar napkin. "Your weapons and equipment will be returned when you reach your ship. In exchange, every human on this station receives safe passage to the independent colonies. I don't have authority to negotiate. You have authority to choose between completing your mission or explaining to High Command why you lost an entire task force to a bartender," Marcus interrupted. "I'm offering you a way to walk away from this with most of your dignity intact." Through the cantina's windows, they could see the evacuation proceeding smoothly. Human families who had lived in fear for years were finally leaving for colonies where they wouldn't be classified as potential terrorists for the crime of existing. Station workers who had kept the facility running were being offered positions with the rescue fleet. Zara approached their table, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee. She'd insisted on staying until the end, despite Marcus's attempts to send her to safety. "The last evacuation pod is loading now," she reported. "The Chen family wanted me to give you this." She handed Marcus a small data pad. The screen showed a simple message: "Thank you for protecting us. We'll never forget. David, Sarah, and Emma Chen." Marcus read it twice, then set the pad aside. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget that children like Emma existed, trying to convince himself that his war was over. But some responsibilities couldn't be retired from, and some fights followed a man wherever he tried to hide. "There's something else," Colonel Thex said quietly. "Something you should know before you make your final decision." Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "High Command is planning a major offensive against the human colonies. Task Force Omega was just the beginning. They're calling it Operation Final Solution." The name sent a chill through the cantina. Marcus had heard rumors, but confirmation from a special operations colonel carried different weight. "How long?" 6 months. Maybe less. They're waiting for more ships, more soldiers. When it comes, it won't be about suppression or deportation. It'll be about elimination." Marcus studied the Thrakari officer's face, looking for deception. Instead, he saw something he hadn't expected: regret. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because what I've seen here today changes things," Thex replied. "My people were told that humans were weak, that you'd surrendered the will to fight. But watching 300 civilians outmaneuver a special operations task force, that's not weakness. That's terrifying competence." The colonel leaned forward, his yellow eyes intense. "If High Command proceeds with their plan, they're going to wake up something they can't put back to sleep. Every human colony will become another Kepler station. Every refugee camp will become a recruiting center. You'll turn the entire species into ghosts." Marcus considered this. He'd spent 3 years hoping the war would end through negotiation, that someone would find a diplomatic solution to what had started as a territorial dispute. But Colonel Thex was confirming what he'd already begun to suspect. Peace was never the goal. The Galactic Enforcement Division wanted a final victory, regardless of the cost. "What are you proposing?" Marcus asked. "Come with me. Testify before the Galactic Council. Tell them what really happened at Kepler Station, at Europa, at all the other places where humans have been classified as terrorists for defending themselves. Make them see what this war really is." Zara looked between the 2 warriors, alien and human, each representing forces that had been trying to destroy each other for years. "Would that work?" "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "The Council has been looking the other way for too long. They're invested in the current system, but it might slow things down," Thex said. "Buy time for a real negotiated settlement. Or at least give the colonies time to prepare for what's coming. The last evacuation pod had launched. Through the windows, they could see the human civilians being transferred to the rescue ships. Families reuniting with relatives they hadn't seen in years. For the first time in decades, humans were leaving Thrakari space alive and free. Marcus stood and walked to the window, watching the ships prepare for departure. You know, Colonel, 3 days ago my biggest worry was whether we had enough Centauri whiskey for the weekend rush. I was actually happy being a bartender. And now, Marcus turned back to face them. And both Zara and Colonel Thex saw the change that had been building for 3 days. The tired bartender was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. The ghost of Kepler Station had fully awakened. Now I remember why I became the ghost in the first place, Marcus said. Someone has to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Someone has to remind the galaxy that humans don't break easily, and someone has to make sure that children like Emma Chen can grow up free. He looked directly at Colonel Thex. I'll come with you to the Galactic Council. I'll tell them exactly what humans are capable of when we're pushed too far, but I want something in return. What? Safe passage for all human civilians in Thrakari space. Not just the ones on this station, all of them. Evacuate them to the independent colonies before your final solution begins. I can't authorize, then find someone who can, Marcus said with quiet intensity. Because if you proceed with that operation while civilians are still in the crossfire, you won't just be fighting the resistance anymore. You'll be fighting every human in the galaxy. Colonel Thex stood slowly, understanding that he'd just heard both an offer and a declaration of war. The ghost of Kepler Station was giving the Galactic Enforcement Division one chance to avoid the conflict that would destroy both species. I'll relay your terms, Thex said. See that you do. And Colonel, when you report to High Command, make sure they understand something. The man who destroyed Kepler Station, who freed thousands of prisoners, who just outfought your entire task force, that man was trying to be retired. He was holding back. Marcus smiled, but it was the expression of a predator showing its teeth. The next time we meet, I might not be in such a generous mood. 3 hours later, Marcus stood in the docking bay of a Galactic Council diplomatic vessel, watching Station Epsilon 7 recede into the distance. His 3-year retirement was over. Ahead lay testimony before the Council, negotiations that would probably fail, and eventually a return to the war he'd tried to leave behind. But in the cargo holds of 12 rescue ships, 300 humans were heading toward freedom. Families like the Chens would have a chance to rebuild their lives in safety. Sometimes that was enough to make the fight worthwhile. Marcus Chen, the ghost of Kepler Station, was going back to war. And this time he wouldn't be fighting alone. Behind him, awakened by his example, an entire species was remembering what it meant to be human. The galaxy was about to learn why ghosts were never truly laid to rest.